Do you remember the so-called GPC files? Yes, the big push on government procurement that the Labour Party made on Monday morning. The party changed the name of their Twitter account to the GPC Files and produced a website showing what the civil service had been spending on with their government procurement cards. But it wasn't long before some of these allegations began to backfire. Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, was left in the awkward position of defending her own expense claims for expensive Apple consumer technology like AirPods Pro, all while she criticised the Foreign Office for booking posh restaurants or first-class hotels. Yes, when Labour began to open that Pandora's box of expenses stories, they opened a big risk that the public would simply say, a plague on all your houses. And it turns out now that the reputed author of Labour's GPC Files dossier is none other than Damien McBride, the former spin doctor to Gordon Brown. And he has helpfully written a book all about his time in the last Labour government, including the extensive hospitality expenses that the Labour Party then racked up. Well, the Guido Fawkes website has dug up this material, and I'm delighted to say that Paul Staines, its founder and editor, joins me live in the studio. Paul, this seems to have backfired a little bit for Labour.
Yeah, I think the CIA use a term from the oil industry called blowback when they politically intervene in a third world country and their intervention blows back in their face in the way that a drill hole with a gas going out explodes. And I think, in some ways, as soon as this started, people started going, well, what about when Labour were in charge? These government procurement cards, the debit card for spending, were a useful innovation. And because of transparency that came in under David Cameron, we can now look at all these bills. So we're looking back at old things. And Ed Balls, Damien McBride's old pal, when he was Education Minister, was racking up in all the best restaurants in Westminster. Some I enjoy very much. But in my case, the taxpayer doesn't get harmed. And we're talking about £1,000 meals that Ed Balls, I don't know who he was taking out. Was he taking out union bosses? Was he taking out teachers? I can understand when the Foreign Office spends a lot on entertainment and cocktail parties.
If there's foreign dignitaries, you might want to
I don't think President Macron is going to be happy going to McDonald's. But I don't understand why an education minister is having these kind of entertainment expenses. And then in that book you referred to, Power Trip by Damien McBride, he talks about when he's over in Washington and New York with Gordon Brown, how he goes out to bars.
We have some of these quotes here that we can show on the screen. This is from Damien McBride's book, Power Trip. If we chartered a flight from BA, Virgin, or one of the occasional private airlines we used, then all the food and booze we'd normally consume was on the flight was obviously thrown in as well. He also wrote, we'd drive out to Summers Restaurant and Sports Bar in Arlington on Saturday mornings, Sunday lunchtimes and weekday afternoons to catch any live Premiership or Champions League games. Gordon wouldn't drink. Well, that's saying that Gordon wouldn't drink, but no doubt the advisers would. I mean, this really is interesting because so many of the people that were there at the top of the Brown administration are now back in running the Labour Party.
Correct. So I had a look at the archives and dug out some of the things that the old shadow cabinet are up to. The current shadow cabinet, who were actually ministers 10, 15, where are we? Almost 20 years ago. And Yvette Cooper, for instance, Ed Balls' wife, she had to repay back mortgage payments. They flipped their house. Do you remember flipping houses where where the taxpayer paid your mortgage, then you sold the house at the profit and bought another one, and the cycle started going 3 times.
And she's now the Shadow Home Secretary who's making a big speech later this morning. Why do you think that these big questions have sort of been forgotten? They've had some time out of power, and now it's like they've got a blank slate.
I think what Damien's mistake here was that he thought that he could paint Rishi as a free-spending, private jet flying character, forgetting his old days flying on private jets, and that we would go back in the archives. So I think the public, the voters, are going to go, they're all the same.
Well, let's bring in Ben Glaze now to this conversation, because do you think that there is always a risk when any politician of any party says, look what these other guys are doing on expenses? I mean, they're all doing it, aren't they?
It is a risk, yeah. I mean, people in glass houses don't throw stones, is the recommendation. Some Labour figures, when they were trying to sell the GPC files as being dubbed, trying to compare it to the expenses scandal from 2008. I mean, this is not the expenses scandal. It doesn't look great when you've got taxpayer-funded stays in five-star hotels and meals costing thousands of pounds. No, we don't want to pay for that. You know, when you see your pay slip and you see how much has gone out each month in tax, you don't want it to be funding champagne-fueled dinners in glitzy restaurants in New York or wherever else. But you do accept that you are going to have to fund some stuff, like Paul says, when you've got visiting dignitaries. Although the idea of Emmanuel Macron having a Big Mac, I'm all for that. French fries as well, isn't it?
Oh, fantastic. Well, at least we haven't renamed them freedom fries, as the United States did in the wake of the Iraq War. But I wonder, when we look at this in the round, why has the Labour Party chosen now to do it? It seemed to sort of all disappear by the middle of this week. Do you think they've understood that perhaps it wasn't the wisest path to go down?
I don't know. Well, news changes, isn't it? I mean, there are, if you dig around in those files, there are other stories waiting to be written, I'm sure. But things like Nicola Sturgeon's resignation yesterday and the far more important story, really, of Jeremy Corbyn. That's more important for Labour, perhaps, than exposing a few Tory ministers spending lavishly on these government procurement cards. You know, if people recognise Jeremy Corbyn, they'll know about that. That will mean more to them, and certainly for Keir Starmer, showing how he's reshaped the Labour Party, that's more important, I think.
Well, a final word to you, Paul Staines, on this entire story. Is this the last we're going to hear of expenses? Will people sort of step back now in terms of thinking this is all too hot to touch?
I would be surprised if they carry on with this, but it's recess week, so we're a bit still short of news. I mean, usually when Parliament's in recess, there's not many political stories.
We talk about UFOs and the like.
Exactly. But we've had Sturgeon, we've had the Corbyn thing. But we've got a few more of these from the archives for today.